The air in the studio was kept at a precise 65 degrees, a temperature designed to keep the audience alert and the host from sweating under the merciless grid of theatrical lighting. In the control booth, the director watched the monitors with the detached precision of a surgeon, counting down the seconds until the commercial break ended. The band, a tight four-piece ensemble that specialized in ironic covers of 70s punk songs, was currently winding down a frantic, upbeat rendition of a Clash song. The energy in the room was electric, artificial, and highly caffeinated. This was the specific frequency of late-night cable news comedy. A place where outrage was metabolized into laughter and skepticism was worn like a designer suit. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk, a structure that looked more like the cockpit of a spacecraft than a piece of furniture. He was spinning a pen between his fingers, his eyes scanning the cue cards held by a stagehand who looked terrified of dropping them. Gutfeld was in his element. He was the court jester who had somehow become the king, the outsider who had conquered the ratings by refusing to play the polite parlor games of traditional talk shows. He thrived on the chaotic, the unexpected, and the uncomfortable. But tonight felt different. The air was thicker. The audience, usually packed with loyalists ready to laugh at the mere raising of an eyebrow, seemed restless. They weren't just waiting for jokes, they were waiting for a collision. "Welcome back," Gutfeld said to the camera, his voice snapping into that familiar, punchy cadence. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a mixture of mischief and predatory intent. "We talk a lot about masculinity on this show. Toxic masculinity, fragile masculinity, masculinity that needs a safe space and a juice box." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, easy and practiced. Greg smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But tonight we decided to bring in the real thing, or at least Hollywood's version of it. He's the guy who makes you feel bad about your bench press and your carbon footprint simultaneously. He saves the world in spandex and saves the planet in linen." Greg paused for effect, letting the anticipation build. "He is the ocean's anger management counselor. Please welcome Jason Momoa." The band kicked into a heavy, distorted riff, something resembling Black Sabbath but played at double speed. The audience erupted. It wasn't the polite applause of a lecture hall. It was a visceral, guttural cheer. And then he walked out. Jason Momoa did not walk so much as he occupied space. He was dressed in a way that defied the studio's unspoken dress code. A faded vintage t-shirt that had seen actual sunlight, heavy canvas pants, and a collection of necklaces that looked like they held spiritual significance rather than monetary value. He was enormous. As he moved across the polished floor, the studio seemed to shrink. The pristine, sterile aesthetic of the set, all sharp angles and blue backlighting, looked suddenly fragile against his jagged, organic presence. Greg stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, a reflex of civilization meeting the wild. He extended a hand. "Jason," he said, his voice struggling to maintain its dominant pitch. "Thanks for coming to the Lion's Den." Momoa looked at the hand, then at Greg's face. A slow, easy smile spread across his features, but his eyes remained watchful. He took Greg's hand, engulfing it completely. "I like lions," Momoa said. His voice was a deep rumble, a subwoofer testing the limits of the studio's audio mix. "Usually they're just hungry, not mean." The audience laughed, a genuine, surprised sound. Greg pulled his hand back, flexing his fingers theatrically for the camera. "I think I just lost circulation in 3 digits, he quipped, sitting back down. "Call a medic." Momoa sat in the guest chair. It was a standard swivel chair designed for average builds. Under Momoa, it looked like a child's toy. He shifted, the leather groaning audibly under his frame, and crossed one massive leg over the other. He didn't lean forward to the desk. He leaned back, opening his chest to the room, instantly disrupting the visual hierarchy. Usually the guest leaned in, seeking approval. Momoa sat back, observing. "So," Greg started, shuffling his papers, "I have to ask, you walked in here, and my testosterone levels just dropped out of intimidation. Is that the effect you go for? Or is it just a side effect of being the size of a condominium?" Momoa didn't laugh. He just held the smile, soft and unbothered. "It's just genetics, bro, and a lot of heavy lifting." Right, lifting, Greg said, tapping his pen. We do a lot of lifting here too, mostly heavy ideas, sometimes heavy eyelids if the monologue goes too long. He waited for the laugh. It came. But seriously, you're everywhere right now. Movies, commercials, protests. You're a busy guy. Do you ever just sit on a couch and eat a bag of chips like a normal human? Or is that against the superhero code? I eat, Momoa said. I eat a lot. Good, that makes me feel better. Greg leaned in, his posture sharpening. The warm-up was over. He was ready to start the dissection. But here's the thing, Jason. You play these characters who are untouchable, kings of the ocean, warriors, barbarians, and then you come out to the real world and you're hugging trees and talking about feelings. It's a bit of a brand confusion for me. Which one is the costume? The question hung in the air. It was a classic Gutfeld trap. Frame sincerity as performance and frame strength as contradiction. The audience quieted down, sensing the shift. Momoa looked at the audience, then back at Greg. He didn't take the bait. He didn't get defensive. The costume is the one they pay me to wear, Momoa said quietly. The rest is just what I am when the cameras turn off. Is it though? Greg shot back, quick as a viper. Because the cameras seem to follow you to the protests too. It's a very cinematic way to save the earth. Momoa blinked, the smile faded, replaced by a look of curious assessment. He looked at Greg not as an enemy, but as a puzzle he hadn't bothered to solve yet. Everything is cinematic if you're watching it through a screen, man, Momoa said. That doesn't mean it's not real. Greg smirked. Touché, but let's dig into that reality a bit. Section 2, the architecture of skepticism. The monitor lights flickered, casting a blue pallor over Greg's face as he adjusted his glasses. He was enjoying this. He liked guests who thought they were immovable objects. It made being the unstoppable force so much more entertaining. The key, Greg knew, was not to attack the person, but to attack the pedestal they stood on. Momoa was sitting there like a monument to organic authenticity, and Greg's job was to point out the cracks in the marble. You talk a lot about the earth, Greg said, his tone shifting from playful to inquisitive. Sacred land, protecting the water. It's very poetic. It looks great on Instagram. He paused, letting the implications settle. But you're also part of an industry that is essentially the world's most expensive pollution machine. Private jets, massive sets, plastic bottles by the millions, so craft services can keep the extras hydrated. Do you ever feel a little tight in the collar about that? Or does the paycheck help loosen the knot? A few people in the audience gasped softly. It was a direct hit, the kind of question that usually made publicists hyperventilate in the green room. Momoa shifted in his chair. The leather creaked again, a sharp sound in the quiet studio. He didn't look angry. He looked patient, like a parent waiting for a child to finish a tantrum. He reached for the mug of water on the desk, a tiny ceramic thing that looked like a thimble in his hand, and took a slow sip. You think the work contradicts the message, Momoa stated. It wasn't a question. I think the work funds the message, Greg corrected. Which is fine. Capitalism is great. I love it. It bought this desk. But I don't pretend I'm saving the world while I'm doing it. I'm just selling ads for pillows. The audience chuckled. Greg was positioning himself as the honest cynic against the hypocritical saint. It was his home turf. Momoa set the mug down. I don't think I'm saving the world, he said, his voice dropping an octave, rumbling through the floorboards. The world doesn't need saving. It's been here a lot longer than us. It'll be here after we're gone. I'm trying to save us. There's a difference. Semantics, Greg waved a hand dismissively. Saving us, saving the whales. It's all part of the good guy package. But here's my point, Jason. You go to these protests, Mauna Kea, the pipelines, and you stand there with the people. And that's great visuals. But then you fly back to Hollywood. You go back to the gated community. Do you understand why some people watching this, he gestured to the camera, might feel like that's a little bit performative? Like it's tourism for you and reality for them? Momoa's eyes narrowed slightly. The playfulness was gone entirely now. He leaned forward just an inch. but the movement felt massive. I was born on an island, Momoa said. I know what happens when the land is taken. I don't go there for visuals. I go there because my family is there. Sure, Greg interrupted, sensing a defensive opening. But you don't live there. You live in the industry. You're a visitor in the struggle, aren't you? You're the celebrity guest star in the activism season finale. I live where the work is, Momoa said, but my blood is where the land is. Blood is a very dramatic word, Greg smiled. Very Game of Thrones. But we're talking about logistics. We're talking about the carbon footprint of righteousness. Momoa stared at him. For a moment, the studio was dead silent. The band drummer had stopped tapping his sticks. The stage manager was holding his breath. Momoa wasn't playing the game. He wasn't offering a soundbite. He was offering a presence that refused to be metabolized by the show's format. You like to simplify things, Momoa said softly. You make it small so you can put it in your pocket and laugh at it. I make it small so we can understand it, Greg countered. Complexity is usually just a hiding place for hypocrisy. If you can't explain it in a joke, it's probably a lie. That's a sad way to live, Momoa said. The audience reacted, an ooh that was mixed with nervous laughter. Greg's smile tightened at the edges. He had been called many things, but sad was a new one. It undercut his authority. It made his cynicism look not like intelligence, but like a wound. Sad? I don't know, Greg chuckled, recovering quickly. I'm having a pretty good time. I'm not the one angry about pipelines. I'm the one enjoying the air conditioning. I'm not angry, Momoa said. I'm protecting. There is a difference. Is there? Greg pushed. Because when I see the videos, you look pretty angry. You look like you want to rip a tank apart with your bare hands, which, to be fair, would be awesome television. But it's anger. Let's own it. It's branding. The angry, righteous warrior. You think protecting your mother is a brand? Momoa asked. The question was simple, stripped of all rhetoric. I think, Greg said, leaning back and crossing his arms, that when you do it in front of 1 million followers, it becomes content. Whether you mean it or not. The camera eats everything, Jason, even your mother. Momoa didn't blink. He sat perfectly still. The sheer physical containment of the man was becoming the loudest thing in the room. He wasn't reacting to Greg's tempo. He was dragging the room down to his own heart rate. You're trying to make me ashamed of being seen, Momoa said. But being seen is the only weapon we have left. If I don't stand there, the cameras don't come. If the cameras don't come, they bulldoze the mountain in the dark. I use the light. You use the dark. Greg's eyebrows shot up. I use the dark? I'm on a comedy show, Jason. We have literally 300 studio lights on right now. I'm practically tanning. You use the noise, Momoa corrected. You make so much noise that people can't hear the earth breaking. Greg laughed, a sharp barking sound. Okay, now we're getting into slam poetry. The earth breaking. Next, you're going to tell me the wind whispers your name. It whispers everyone's name, Momoa said, completely deadpan. You just stopped listening. Section 3, the weight of the room. The commercial break had been delayed. The producer in the control booth signaled for Greg to keep going. The numbers were climbing. The tension was sticky, glue-like, holding viewers to the screen. This wasn't the usual verbal sparring where both parties agreed to a draw. This was a slow-motion collision between two different realities. Greg felt the shift. He needed to regain control. He needed to bring the audience back to his side. The side of the rationale, the skeptical, the anti-Hollywood. He needed to make Momoa look ridiculous again. Let's pivot, Greg said, shuffling his cards with a snap. Let's talk about masculinity again, because you are the poster child for it. Beards, axes, motorcycles. You're the guy every dude wants to have a beer with, and every woman wants to, well, have a beer with. Laughter, easy, safe laughter. But you also paint your nails. You wear pink velvet. You cry in interviews. Is this a strategy? Are you trying to hack the system? Be the tough guy who is also soft so you can market to everyone. Momoa looked down at his hands. They were scarred, large, capable. He turned them over, examining the palms as if reading a map. I don't have a strategy, he said. I just do what I feel. Why are you so obsessed with labels? Pink, blue, tough, soft. It's all just water, man. It's not just water, Greg said, his voice sharpening. It's culture. And culture is a battlefield right now. You represent something specific. You represent a version of manhood that is permissible in Hollywood because it apologizes for itself. You're the safe savage. You look dangerous, but you say all the right political things. It's a very convenient package. Momoa slowly raised his head. The lights caught the hard planes of his face. I don't apologize, he said. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Really, Brasco? Greg pressed. Because I've seen the apology tours. You step out of line, you say something the internet doesn't like, and suddenly there's a statement, a clarification. I'm learning, I'm growing. It feels like you're on a leash, Jason, a very expensive velvet leash. But a leash. This was the attack vector Greg excelled at, accusing the guest of cowardice disguised as growth. He waited for Momoa to stutter, to explain the nuances of PR, to blame his team. Momoa didn't stutter. He leaned forward again, and this time he placed his elbows on the desk. The structure actually shuddered slightly under the weight. He invaded Greg's personal space, not with aggression, but with intimacy. I listen, Momoa said. If I hurt someone, I say sorry. That's not a leash. That's being a man. A child refuses to say sorry. A man fixes what he broke. That's a nice soundbite, Greg scoffed. But we know how the game is played. You say sorry to keep the sponsors. You say sorry to keep the franchise. I don't care about the franchise, Momoa said. His voice was flat, devoid of the usual promotional enthusiasm. Oh, come on, Greg rolled his eyes. Now you're lying to me. You care. The house, the cars, the freedom? You care. I care about my kids, Momoa said. I care about my dignity. If the franchise goes away tomorrow, I can still climb a rock. I can still fish. Can you? Greg blinked. Can I fish? I can buy a fish. That's not the same, Momoa said. He wasn't mocking Greg. He was looking at him with genuine pity. If the lights go out, Greg, if this, he gestured to the studio, if all this goes away, who are you? Can you feed yourself? Can you build a shelter? I can hire guys like you to do it for me, Greg shot back. The audience laughed, but it was thinner this time. The joke felt defensive. It felt like a retreat into class privilege, which was usually the thing Greg attacked. And if we don't want to work for you? Momoa asked. A small smile touched his lips. What then? The question hung there. It stripped away the complex social contract of the studio. It reduced the interaction to the primal. What if the strong stopped serving the loud? Greg felt a prickle of irritation on the back of his neck. He was losing the frame. He was being painted as the helpless elite, and Momoa was becoming the competent everyman. It was a complete reversal of the narrative Greg had intended. We're getting very apocalyptic, Greg said, forcing a chuckle. Very Mad Max. I love it. But let's come back to reality. The reality where you are a millionaire actor lecturing working-class people about how to live their lives. I don't lecture, Momoa said. I show. You show off, Greg corrected. There's a difference. Why does my existence bother you so much? Momoa asked. He sounded genuinely curious. Is it because I'm happy, or is it because I don't need your approval to be happy? Nothing about you bothers me, Greg lied. I find you fascinating. You're a contradiction. And I'm a journalist, sort of. I poke contradictions. You poke things because you're scared to touch them, Momoa said. Section 4, The Silence of the Mountain. The audience was no longer laughing on cue. They were watching a wrestling match where one participant was using judo and the other was trying to use slapstick. The dynamic had shifted. Greg Gutfeld, usually the master of the quick verbal jab, was finding that his punches were landing on granite. Every time he tried to speed up the conversation, Momoa slowed it down. Every time he tried to make it trivial, Momoa made it existential. Greg decided to go for the jugular. He needed a reaction. He needed Momoa to lose his cool. An angry Momoa was a discredited Momoa. An angry Momoa proved that under the zen exterior, he was just another Hollywood narcissist who couldn't handle criticism. Let's talk about your family, Greg said. He saw Momoa's eyes flicker. A warning sign. Greg ignored it. You keep them out of the spotlight mostly, which is smart, but you also use the Father Earth image to sell movies. You're the dad who protects, the dad who fights. Do you think there's a point where you're monetizing your own paternal instincts? Where being a good dad is just another line on the resume? Momoa went still, absolute terrifying stillness. The kind of stillness that happens in a forest right before a predator strikes. He didn't blink. He stared at Greg with an intensity that made the host look away for a split second. "Careful," Momoa whispered. The microphone barely picked it up, but it thundered through the studio speakers. Greg smirked, sensing blood. "I'm just asking, is the family man routine real? Or is it just to make the moms buy tickets to Aquaman? Because let's be honest, Jason, in your world, nothing is sacred. Everything is for sale. Even the kids." It was a step too far. Everyone in the room knew it. The line between provocative interviewing and personal insult had been crossed. Momoa didn't explode. He didn't flip the desk. He didn't shout. He simply stopped participating. He leaned back in his chair, folding his massive arms across his chest. He looked at Greg, then he looked past Greg, at the wall behind him. He removed his attention from the host completely. It was a dismissal so profound, it felt like a slap. Greg waited for a response. "Jason? Nothing? No defense?" Momoa remained silent. He breathed deeply in and out. He was present in the room, but he had vacated the conversation. "Okay," Greg laughed nervously. The silent treatment. Very dramatic. Very method acting. "But it doesn't answer the question." Momoa turned his head slowly. "I answered you," he said. "You just didn't like the answer. So now I'm done talking." "You're done talking? We have 2 segments left," Greg said, his voice rising in pitch. "You can't just stop talking. It's a talk show." "Watch me," Momoa said. He turned his body away from the desk, facing the audience directly. He winked at a woman in the front row. She giggled, a nervous, electrified sound. Greg was left talking to a profile. He was interviewing a mountain that had decided to ignore the wind. "This is childish," Greg said. "You're proving my point. You can't handle scrutiny. You want the applause, but you don't want the questions." Momoa didn't flinch. He began to hum, a low, deep hum, almost a vibration. It wasn't a song, it was a frequency. Are you humming?" Greg asked, incredulous. "Is this a meditation technique, or are you just trying to be annoying?" Momoa stopped humming. He looked at Greg one last time. "I'm vibrating at a level you can't reach," he said. "You're down there in the mud, throwing rocks. I'm up here." "Oh, you're up there?" Greg mocked. "High and mighty? The God complex comes out." "Not God," Momoa said calmly. "Just grown. You should try it." Section 5, the reversal of gravity. The control room was in chaos. The executive producer was shouting into Greg's earpiece. "Get him back. Pivot. Go to a clip. Do something, But Greg was paralyzed. He had built his career on being the alpha in the room, the one who dictated the terms of engagement. But he couldn't dictate terms to a man who refused to acknowledge the contract. Momoa stood up. He didn't rush. He uncrossed his legs, planted his boots on the floor, and rose to his full height. He towered over the desk. He towered over Greg. The camera angle had to tilt up violently to keep his head in the frame. "Where are you going?" Greg asked. He sounded small. He hated how small he sounded. "I'm going to find some real air," Momoa said. He looked down at Greg. It wasn't a look of anger anymore. It was a look of disappointment. "You had a chance, man. We could have talked about real things. We could have talked about the water, about the future, but you just wanted to play a game." "It's a comedy show," Greg snapped, standing up to try and regain some height. "It's a joke. You're supposed to laugh." "I laugh at funny things," Momoa said. "Cruelty isn't funny. It's just cheap." Momoa turned to the audience. "Thank you," he said. He brought his hands together in a prayer motion, bowed slightly to the crowd, and then turned to walk off stage. "You walk off now. You look like a coward," Greg shouted after him. It was a desperate Hail Mary, a final attempt to bait him back into the ring. Momoa stopped. He was 10 feet away from the wings. He turned slowly. The studio was dead silent. No one breathed. Coward? Momoa repeated. He walked back toward the desk. Greg flinched. It was subtle, a micro-expression of fear, but the 4K cameras caught it. Momoa saw it. Momoa stopped at the edge of the platform. A coward stays where it's safe, he said. You sit behind that desk. That desk protects you. Your writers protect you. That camera protects you. You throw words like spears because you know no one can throw them back. Momoa tapped his own chest. I stand out here. No desk, no script, just me. I answered your questions. I looked you in the eye. And when you insulted my family, I didn't hurt you. I showed you mercy. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. Walking away isn't cowardice, Greg. It's restraint. Be grateful for it. He held Greg's gaze for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the power dynamic of the show was permanently altered. The host was no longer the judge. He was the defendant. The guest was no longer the entertainment. He was the verdict. Momoa turned and walked away. His stride was long and rhythmic. He disappeared behind the heavy velvet curtains. Greg was left standing alone in the center of the blue lights. The audience didn't applaud. They didn't boo. They were stunned. They had come for a circus, and they had witnessed a sermon. Greg looked at the camera. The red tally light was burning, demanding a reaction, demanding a punchline. He opened his mouth, but the joke died in his throat. There was no way to spin this. If he made a joke now, he would look petty. If he got angry, he would look weak. He sat down slowly. He shuffled his papers. His hands were shaking slightly. Well, Greg said, his voice flat. That happened. He looked at the band. Play something loud. Section 6, the aftermath of silence. The band scrambled to play. They launched into a frenetic cover of Should I Stay or Should I Go, the irony thick enough to choke on. The cameras cut to a wide shot, showing the empty guest chair spinning slowly, a ghost of the presence that had just vacated it. The commercial break hit. The studio lights dimmed. Usually during breaks, Greg would interact with the audience. He would tell off-color jokes, sign autographs, keep the energy up. Tonight, he stayed in his chair. He took a long drink of water. He spoke to his producer in low, furious tones. The audience sat in an awkward silence, whispering among themselves. They checked their phones. Twitter was already burning. The clip of the coward exchange had been ripped and uploaded within seconds. It was viral before the commercial break ended. The comments were not falling in Greg's favor. Even his usual defenders were quiet. There was something about the visual, the sheer size of Momoa, the calmness of his voice versus the shrillness of the host, that bypassed politics and hit a primal nerve. Momoa just ended this man's whole career without raising his voice, one comment read. I don't care about the environment, but you don't talk about a man's kids, read another. When the show came back on the air, Greg looked different. The sharp, mischievous glint was gone, replaced by a brittle professionalism. He finished the show. He did the remaining segments. He interviewed a minor political pundit who agreed with everything he said. But the energy was dead. The room felt hollow. The episode ended. The credits rolled. Greg did his signature sign-off, but it lacked the usual bite. Backstage, Jason Momoa was already gone. He hadn't stopped to yell at producers. He hadn't demanded an apology. He had simply walked to his car, taken off the microphone, and left. He drove his vintage truck out of the studio lot, windows down, merging into the New York traffic. In the days that followed, the narrative tried to reassert itself. Greg's show released clips titled, Momoa Can't Handle the Truth, and Hollywood Snowflake Melts Down. They tried to frame it as a victory for the show, proof that the elites couldn't handle real questions. But the raw footage told a different story. The internet analyzed every micro-expression. Body language experts made hour-long videos dissecting the dominance hierarchy of the interaction. They pointed out how Momoa never fidgeted, how he held eye contact, how he controlled the physical space. They pointed out Greg's defensive posture, his rapid blinking, his reliance on the audience for validation. It wasn't a political debate, it was a study in gravity. Greg Gutfeld continued to host his show. He continued to be successful. He continued to mock Hollywood. But he never invited Jason Momoa back. And whenever he spoke about tough guys in future monologues, there was a hesitation, a slight check in his rhythm, as if he was remembering the moment when the mountain stood up and the view from the top of the desk suddenly didn't look so high. The story wasn't about who won the argument. Arguments are cheap. The story was about the difference between authority that is granted by a camera and authority that is carried in the bones. One man needed the lights to be seen. The other man brought his own shadow.